we will try and sort these links out for you. Okay. 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 Right. So let's go ahead with the discussion of why we are here and what we're going to be doing. I'm sure. Can all of you see my screen?
Yes, Prof, is visible now.
It's visible. Okay. Yes. All right, you should have received a copy of the schedule, which shows you more or less when we'll be having our contact sessions starting from today. So typically, we'll be meeting from 5 to 7 every Thursday until the 15th of August, and every Saturday from 9 to 4. But I do want to alert you to the fact that I'm not necessarily going to go on till 4 o'clock on Saturdays. If I feel we've covered enough by 1 p.m., we will stop there, just like we did for the previous SLP. So basically, we will be continuing every Thursday and Saturday, right up until the 15th of August, when we'll have our last contact session. And thereafter, there will be a long break until the 7th of September, when we will meet again for you to do your presentations on the highlights of your portfolio to prepare you for the exam. So I'll tell you a bit more about the portfolio later, but that's basically the schedule that we'll be following. So we will end with the formal contact sessions on the 15th of August, and then there will be a long break, and we'll meet on the Saturday before the fourth term starts at UJ, and that's when you will need to have your presentations ready. Now, some of you did contact me in advance to say that you will not be able to attend some of the sessions. There's no problem with that because they will be recorded. I think, Chandra, you and I will sit together maybe tomorrow or on Monday to look at ways to make these links downloadable for the students so that we don't have the same problem that we did last semester. Okay. So anyway,
Sorry, Prof, can I just add to that quickly?
Sure, go ahead, Chandra.
So from what I know, the team has sent us links through their general account, so they will already be able to download it. Then I know that ITS has this new thing where everybody has to upload it through YouTube. So it will be uploaded to a channel where everybody can immediately access it. There'll be no need for downloading and things anymore.
Okay, all right, not a problem. Will you share the YouTube links with us?
Yes, I will let the team know on what's tomorrow, Friday.
Friday, okay. All right, thank you for that information, Chandra. Yes, I think we need to make things a little bit more user-friendly so that we don't encounter the problems that we had last semester. Okay, so basically, what are we doing this semester? And I trust you can see my PowerPoint slides as well. Can you all see it?
Not yet.
Okay, let's give it some time to load. Just give me the signal when you can see it. Is it still not visible?
I can still see the schedule.
You can still see the schedule, okay? Wait, let me just end the show and let me just try and something else. Let me close the schedule. Can you see my PowerPoint screen now?
No.
No, okay. All right, let me just stop sharing and then unshare. Okay, I see it stopped sharing on its own. Okay, that's weird. Should not have happened. But anyway, let me just share again. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to put it on slideshow, because I think it's allowing me to share one window at a time. Okay, so basically, you've now learned the basic ropes of postgraduate supervision. And what we're going to unpack now in the short learning program is some of the challenges and issues that we encounter on a day-to-day basis in postgraduate supervision. And I can tell you from my own experience, the list is very long. There's a different challenge that you encounter with students every single day. So basically, what I'm going to cover again with you, just for the purposes of revision, is how do we contextualize postgraduate supervision, and then I'm going to give you a brief overview of the short learning program or module, some of the important things to take note of, and we'll discuss the learner guide as well as your study material, which you will access on Moodle. And then I will start proper with Unit 1 after that. Okay, so remember that in postgraduate supervision, you are wearing two hats. You're wearing the hat of a supervisor, in that you've got the student and it's your duty to guide them and take them through the process. But at the same time, you are also a researcher trying to engage in your own research while taking the student through the whole process. So basically, there's two aspects to supervision here. There's the supervision of the student, and there's also the supervision of the research and the project. And these two together can present us with some challenges. Okay, so as we go through the different contact sessions, you will be encouraged to make some journal entries, which are important, because what we are working towards for your exam equivalent submission is a final portfolio, and you will be doing presentations based on that portfolio as well. So just like in the previous SLP that I did with you, you had to produce a handbook and present the highlights of that. In the same way here, you're going to build a final portfolio. And in our last presentation session on the 7th of September, you're going to present the highlights of your portfolio. Now, there's 3 units that we are going to be covering here, and you're going to bring it all together into one portfolio. So I'm going to encourage you to make journal entries as far as we go along. And it's all going to build up towards that final portfolio. In some of your activities as well, they're going to highlight the journal entries. Okay, just to look at some of the outcomes of this model. Basically, we're going to focus on the purpose of your own research and the research that the students are doing. Now, usually it's one and the same thing, because you cannot guide a student on a topic that you don't have expertise in, right? But we do get rare cases, and I've encountered that with previous cohorts raising this issue and asking questions, where the supervisor is not necessarily an expert on the topic, but they are asked to supervise it anyway. So that in its own right is a challenge, right? Then it's about reconsidering and reflecting on your own research and evaluating whether it is contextualized, whether it accommodates changes in social needs. Now, this can actually differ depending on what type of student you are dealing with. Remember, students come from different social backgrounds. We get our South African students who come with their own issues and challenges. Then we get our international students that come with a different set of challenges. So we need to evaluate the kind of research that we're doing and focus on whether it's responsive to the context and the social changes that students are faced with on a day-to-day basis, right? And then we're also going to look at the research contribution towards decolonization and cognitive justice. Now, as far as decolonization goes, that's a challenge of its own kind, which we're going to unpack in Unit 1 today, but we've heard this term over and over again at UJ. A familiar context is decolonization of the curriculum. Are you teaching content that is applicable to the South African environment? That's typically what they've been interested in. So we're going to focus a bit on decolonization and cognitive justice in this SLP. And it's also to look critically and reflectively at your own assumptions as a researcher. There's certain things we assume about students, there's certain things we expect them to know, but unfortunately, it's not always the case, right? I expect someone who comes to study for a PhD under my supervision to know his basic concepts in chemistry. But that's not always the case. We assume things, but the student in front of you is coming from a different background altogether. So that's what this module is also meant to unpack. And then in decolonization, typically we're looking at the South African context under which we have to supervise. And typically it's not just about us taking on more South African students. It's also about, is the research that we are engaging in responsive to decolonization? Are we engaging in research that addresses South African problems? That's what it's about. And then cognitive justice, to acknowledge that different forms of knowledge coexist. Sometimes you and your students may agree on a particular topic. Sometimes you may disagree, and that can lead to its own challenges. So there's different forms of knowledge out there, different views, different opinions. Okay, so I'm going to now leave you with a little bit of an icebreaker activity. I'm going to give you a few minutes to jot down, what do you consider to be one of the main challenges in, firstly, research supervision, and secondly, postgraduate supervision? Now remember that there's a difference between the two. In research supervision, we're looking at the topic itself. What area of research are you in, and how are you supervising that? And then postgraduate supervision, you're looking at the actual supervision of the students. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes just to jot on a few points, and then we'll engage in discussion on this. And just remember, if you don't want to speak, you can jot down your points on the chat box as well. Okay, thank you. 5 minutes are up. I just want to stop sharing so that I can see the comments on the chat box, or if anybody has anything to share, you can also raise your hand. Okay. What do you consider to be the major challenges? Any responses on that? Do I take your silence as though you've not encountered any challenges as yet? Okay, go ahead, Radebe Mfundo.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. I don't have a lot of list, but the challenge that I've encountered in a research supervision, firstly, it is the ethics approval. They send you pillar to post, especially if the study it requires a data collection from the primary source, not to use the desktop or secondary research. So those are the challenges that I've encountered as well, and the funding as well. You are expected to travel, collect the information, and at the same time, you also required to attend conferences to present your research paper, which requires a lot of money. And for you to publish as well, you need some editing before you submit your full manuscript or your research paper. Then, with regard postgraduate supervision, I've seen that students have challenges in terms of writing a proposal. I think the problem is the transition from NQ level 7 to NQ level 8. That's the first transition, and the language of research in NQ level 7, which is the normal degree, especially in humanities, we don't have like research module, and we speak about the general, we speak about quantitative and qualitative. What is quantitative and like we don't go deeper. So when it comes for students to understand and the research methodology section, it becomes a challenge. And the funding as well. We've seen challenges of students not pursuing their studies because of the funding. They can't do registration, and uh, they can't attend conferences to see their peers presenting the work that they are doing. Some of the students, they don't even know what they are interested about in the study that they are conducting. I've seen that students, they rush to get the topic, whereas they don't know or they have no idea of the topic that they want to research about. So those are the challenges that I've encountered as a novice researcher and in an academic career. So thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you, Mfundo, for sharing that with us. And indeed, some of the things you've highlighted there are things that we all can relate to. The funding is always a big issue. I mean, budgets have been cut. Equipment to carry out research is very, very expensive, but you are expected to do it. It just goes without saying. The funding is just one issue. And yes, I do concur that ethical clearance is also a big issue, because some faculties actually take a lot of time to approve a proposal before it can actually serve. So, two important things. And yes, another important thing you've touched on is sometimes students take on postgraduate studies just for the sake of doing it. And you probably, many of you may even agree with this, that some South African students are just financially challenged. And some of them actually come to pursue postgraduate studies because they can't get a job after, basically after they get their undergraduate qualification. And that's a challenge because they're not doing the research because they're passionate about it. They're just doing it for the sake of having something to do. And that creates problems for us as supervisors as well. So, Deveshri, I'm now going to give you a chance to talk.
Thanks, Prof, and greeting colleagues. It's nice to be back. I think in terms of research supervision, the stumbling block for me really starts with that research topic. For students, it's, sometimes they try to be too ambitious and the topic lacks focus and clarity. In terms of the postgraduate research supervision, what I find as a stumbling block or a challenge is the capacity, academic writing skills, the research skills. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a general lack of capacity for students to actually conduct research. Thanks, Prof.
Okay, yes, that's another important point that you've raised here. Is some students are meant to stop at undergraduate level. They don't necessarily have the tools to take on postgraduate studies as well. So that's another challenge we are faced with. And something that in both Mfundo and I see Sundika has also got it in her on the no, it's not Sundika, sorry, it's Gabriel who's mentioned it, is cultural and language barriers. Language is a challenge with our students. Not all of them speak English as their first language, so basically trying to put together a proposal in English, trying to put together a dissertation or a literature review is a challenge for many of our students as well. And also the communication between supervisor and student can be problematic if there's a language barrier. So I'm just going to quickly go through the chat box to look at some of the things that Sundika has written. So she says that her research niche area is forensic anatomy. And one of the major challenges she encounters there is a lack of human tissue or osteological specimens. There's the Poppy Act, which makes it difficult for them to access retrospective radiological banks. This act was not as popular when the patients took their scans, hence permission may not have been granted. So to get the actual specimens to work out, that would be a challenge in conducting the research. And then Gabriel's also brought up some other important points. Time management, yes. You find that students sometimes just don't have a sense of time. And many of them go into extended time because they don't plan their work appropriately. Then he's also, okay, he's raised the issue of financial resources, which we've touched on already, ethical compliances. I think Mfundu also mentioned that, and providing feedback that is effectual and progressive. Yeah, now that also depends on the supervisor and the student on how you actually plan things. And we did unpack that last semester, that having regular meetings with the student is important. Keeping track of the student's work is important. But yes, I also find from my own experience that time management also tends to impact adversely on students and their progress. Okay. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add? Okay, I think we've had quite a productive icebreaker discussion on these
Sorry,
general.
Prof. Sorry, Prof.
Yes, yes, go ahead,
Before you
Mfundo.
Before you proceed, there is another challenge that I have noticed. I don't think, I think even my colleagues here can concur with me. The lack of, not the lack of supervision. If you go to other institutions, like for example, you apply for a PhD, like me, they will tell you that you must have a supervisor. Then I kind of ask myself, okay, how come should I identify the supervisor? Whereas I'm applying for that institution because I am applying with the hope that I'm going to be allocated the supervisor because I've read about their biographies and their research interest. So now my research topic is based on one of the staff members that, okay, maybe this one might be interested in supervising my PhD study. So that's another challenge that we register, or you go to university to submit a proposal, then students, they wait for months, years in order to get the feedback. And that feedback that they don't get, it makes them pessimist about the whole research, I think, journey rather. Then I think that's another challenge that the postgrad students are facing, the allocation of supervisors.
Okay, that kind of situation can be avoided if the student has identified the supervisor based on the research interest. Then the student has to contact that supervisor and make sure that the supervisor is willing to take him on. Because then you apply and then you indicate who the name of your supervisor is. And the supervisor obviously has to confirm with faculty. So that kind of challenge can be avoided provided that the university and the student is advised correctly in terms of what they want to do. Okay, so I think it's also the department's responsibility. If a student comes in and they haven't quite identified the supervisor, they got to indicate what their research interests are so that they can be referred appropriately. Okay, so I'm not sure which institution you're referring to, Mfundo, but really they got to have their protocols in place there. Kenny, you have something to say?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Thank you, colleagues. I think what I want to say has been touched on, but it's a different one. Gabriel mentioned that it's time management, and when you explained, you spoke about how the students sometimes struggle to submit their assignments on time or their research milestones on time. But there are times as well when supervisors fail to submit to provide feedback on time, and that becomes a challenge, and partly because of heavy workloads, for example, teaching, meetings, and many other things, and then it takes months before a student receives feedback. So I think that sometimes is a challenge, and sometimes it comes from the department and from the faculty pushing students, many students, pushing supervisors to take up many students. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kenny. That is a very relevant and applicable problem currently. I mean, as an academic, you're expected to do so many things. You have to teach your classes, you have to mark, and then you got to attend to your postgraduate students, and there's pressure to take on more students. And some supervisors actually go the route of even getting postdoctoral fellows to assist them with the supervision part because it becomes a little too much. I mean, from the student's point of view, you are delaying them, but they have no idea what you're actually going through. I mean, for example, today I've been in meetings since 10 o'clock this morning, and there's no way I could have had time to even read my students' papers and give them feedback. Just as a matter of interest, before we move on, Has anyone experienced the Viva, the PhD oral defense as yet? And do you not see that as a challenge of its own kind? I'd like to hear some comments on that if anyone has experienced it. Because UJ decided to go that route this year. I'd just like to hear some comments. Have any of you experienced it? Not, okay. Well, I can tell you from my own experience, that's quite a challenge. It is time consuming because as a supervisor, over and above reading the students' thesis and giving them constructive feedback to submit on time, you also got to prepare them for the Viva. So that takes up time. Just this morning, I spent over 2 hours preparing a PhD student that I co-supervised for her Viva, which is coming up next week. And I can tell you from what I've experienced so far, it's not only the student that's being examined, their supervisor gets examined too. I'm not sure what format other faculties are presenting their Vivas in, but we are expected to let the student present, then the 3 examiners engage with the students, the audience engages with the student, then the student and the audience is excused, and then the supervisors stay back to answer questions and queries from the examiners. So it's like the supervisors undergoing examination as well. That can be physically and emotionally draining. Zamakushle, you'd like to say something?
Good afternoon, colleagues, and good afternoon to Prof. I think what is happening now, Prof, is that UJ is sort of following the American way of doing things, where yeah, where supervision is done in a threefold way, where the student firstly, in the American context, has to present his or her proposal and defend it, and then write the first 3 chapters, and then come back to defend the findings and the analysis in front of the committee, which is a totally different case for us in the South African context. But I think they are now trying to modify and duplicate, those trajectories of research supervision, drawing from America or the US, if you like, because because it's something we're not familiar with here in South Africa, and it does sound too much and too draining, and especially if you're gonna go into also examining the supervisor herself, because it's like you don't trust her. So yeah, I think they are trying to duplicate and modify at the same time.
Yeah. Basically, it comes to this concept of international benchmarking. That's what it is. And I think you've got it spot on there. Okay, thank you for that, Zamakushle. I just want to share my screen again and go back to my presentation. Okay, so, sorry. Okay, so that was our icebreaker activity. Basically, also, one of the challenges that we encounter in research is the planning of an actual research project. Like, you need to plan the research such that it has some relevance. Is it relevant to whom and relevant to what and who decides? And something that I always encourage students to do when they are stuck for a project, I will say to them, look, this is the areas that I have expertise on. This is what I do. Identify your interests in that field and come back to me. Try to put it in a South African context where there's a specific context that you have to relate the research to. But then comes the third question. Who decides on the research? Is it you who gives the student the project, or is the student allowed to come with his or her own idea? And that's one of the challenges that come along with supervision. So what I would like you to do is think about these 3 points. Use your thoughts about these questions in your journal and your final portfolio, because it's important when planning the research. You don't just take on a research topic for the sake of it. There has to be a problem identification, and something which we really need to work towards doing is engaging in research that has an impact, some kind of impact on society, where it's actually addressing a real life project. So in looking at the relevance of your research, these are the 3 key questions you've got to ask yourself, and you've got to use your student, or rather guide your student along those lines. You need to ask yourself, who is this research relevant to? Is it to pursue your own interests, or is it something that really appeals to the student as well? Or what South African problem is this addressing, relevant to what? And then who decides on the topic? Do you just give the student a topic, or does the student go and research and come to you with his own ideas? So I want you to think about this and jot down your points in your journal. And obviously, you're going to use this towards building up your final portfolio as well, right? And then just to talk a little bit about the assessments that you're going to engage in this module. So you'll be covering a range of activities in which you'll be expected to do similar things like what you did last semester, writing reading responses. And we did go through some of the guidelines for writing reading responses, where you're given some readings, and in some cases you can even use your own readings and write responses on them. Then there's these points that you'll be jotting down in your journals to reflect upon. I can say to you that every little thing we do in this module should be recorded in your journal, because you're going to use your journal as a useful tool in compiling that final portfolio. And then we will be having our discussion forums in class, and also you will engage with each other online on Moodle as well. Some activities may require you to conduct and report on interviews, similar to what you did last semester, where you had to interview an experienced supervisor as well. So it's a range of different activities that you will be expected to do. It's activity-based learning, in other words, and here again, I'm emphasizing the importance of the journal entries. I strongly encourage you to keep a journal, even though I'm not going to assess it or in any way. Everything you record in that journal is going to help you put together the final portfolio. So as of today, start compiling your journals. Discussion forums, which you may have online with each other, or which you will engage in with me in the class, will give you an opportunity to reflect on your journal entries and give you more kind of a personal guidance as to where you're going with your research supervision and your student supervision. Okay, so it's a lot of activity-based learning here. The ultimate goal is to come up with supervision practices which are contextualized and responsive to the changes that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. Now, 20 years ago, when I started my career as an academic, or rather, let's just say 23 years ago, when I started off at the academic institution, it was a technicon. It wasn't even a research-based institution. So academics engaging in research wasn't a must. You could just teach your classes, do your marking, and carry on. But if I'm looking back now, 23 years later, the things that I'm expected to do in my job have changed. Supervision practices have changed as well. There was a time when you could just give a student a project and tell him, run with it, go do the research and come back to me. But now you cannot do that anymore. You find that students are lacking certain skills. They're lacking communication skills. They are lacking writing skills. So now it becomes your responsibility as a supervisor to ensure that they get all those skills while at the same time trying to guide them through the process of getting that particular degree. So that is the ultimate goal of this module, is to enable us to come up with supervision practices that can equip us to handle these different changes. And like I said earlier, the Viva is a challenge of its own. It's something we've never done before. It's new to us, and now suddenly, as a supervisor, you're not only expected to read the student's thesis and give comments and make him or her submit on time, you're also expected to prepare the student for the Viva and prepare yourself for it too. So that's a changing imperative, right? So this is what your portfolio is going to require you to do, that final portfolio that you're going to prepare. The topic is basically practices of supervision responsive to change and relevant and authentic to the South African university environment. So as we go through the different units, you're going to be jotting down points on some of the changes and how we're going to make our supervision practices responsive to that change, and how is it relevant and applicable in the South African context. So that's basically what your final portfolio needs to show. Okay, now in addition to the activity-based learning, where you will be expected to complete certain activities and submit them, and prepare your presentation and develop that final portfolio, you will also be expected to submit 3 assignments. It's 1 per unit. So in unit 1, you will be required to write an opinion paper for academic peers and postgraduate students on what is involved in making research and supervision more responsive, authentic, and inclusive, given the imperatives of decolonization and cognitive justice. So we're specifically focusing on decolonization and cognitive justice there. I'll tell you a bit more as at the end of unit 1, where you will be expected to work on that assignment. Then in assignment 2, you're going to look at innovation in postgraduate qualification forms and student support needs and practices in the different disciplines. Now, this entails looking at perhaps new postgraduate qualifications that you may need to offer to cater for needs of students, okay? And that is really an interesting one. Then the last assignment, which you will be submitting for Unit 3, is you'll be looking at supervision practices in response to diversity, inclusion, and knowledge plurality, basically different forms of knowledge. And I think this comes at a right time, just as we're about to enter Heritage Month and celebrate the different cultures that we have in South Africa. So you're going to specifically focus on that in assignment 3. So at the end of each unit, you'll also be expected to submit an assignment. I again want to remind everyone on the Chatham House rules, which we quite rigorously applied last semester. It doesn't matter whether it's a meeting, a forum discussion, or a group activity. We do not mention names of anybody. We use terms like Jane Doe, Jack Doe, Professor X, and so on. Okay, so thank you. That was just the brief introduction or icebreaker introduction, so to speak, in terms of the introductory part. Now, I quickly want to share my screen again and go through the learner guide with you, which basically would cover most of the things that I discussed in my presentation. So let me share that again. Okay. Just trying to find the right screen. Let's see. Okay, there it is. Okay, can you all see the learner guide? Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, Prof, it's visible.
Okay, okay. Obviously, you will have access to this on Moodle as well. So I'm not going to go through everything in detail. Obviously, I think everyone knows my email address and how to get hold of me. And you know how to access the different resources, the library, and so on. And we do have an online library where you can download resources. So I'm not going to go through all that boring part. You know about that. And this is just giving you the different contact session, which I've spoken to you about. And then there's basically we expected to do 200 hours because there's 20 credits involved, but I'm not going to rigorously stick to 9 to 4 o'clock on a Saturday. Once we've covered enough on the Saturday, I will stop and we will continue from there. So in terms of the program, we are on contact session 1 today, and hopefully we're going to make a start with unit 1 as well, and we'll continue on Saturday. Now for unit 1, you'll have 5 activities. 4 activities, each counting 5 marks. So you'll get a mark out of 20 for your activities. Then there's assignment 1. Now the due dates are given to you there. I think most of your assessments for this module are due on the 2nd of September. So all the activities and the assignments are due on the 2nd of September. Then on the 7th of September, we'll have the presentation session. And on the 10th of September, your final portfolio is due. Okay, so please take note of the due dates. It's here on your learner guide. The assignment is marked out of 20, so there's a mark out of 40 for unit 1. Likewise, in unit 2, you'll have 4 activities, each counting 5 marks, and assignment 2 will count 20. The same applies to unit 3. So for each unit, it's 4 activities, each carrying a total of 5 marks, which gives you 20 marks for the activities and 20 marks for the assignment. So each unit counts 40 marks each. That gives you a total of 120. Then your presentations, which you're going to do on the 7th of September, will count 20 marks, right? And then the exam equivalent assessment will count 80 marks. So basically, your activities and your assignments in total make up 120 marks. Your presentation makes up 20 and your exam equivalent 80. So that's a total of 220 that you'll be marked out of, and basically that will be given to you as a percentage. So that's basically how we're going to calculate the marks, and please take note of the due date. So all your activities and your assignments are due on the 2nd of September. The Presentations based on the highlights of your portfolio will take place on the 7th of September. Now, those of you, I think one or two of you did contact me to say that you won't be available, but in that case, I gave you the option of recording your presentation and sending it through to me for assessment. The final portfolio is due on the 10th of September. So please take note of those dates and please stick to them, because the sooner we get done, the better for all of us. And remember, I've also got my own deadlines with respect to mark submissions and so on. I've already discussed the 3 assignments briefly. Just to go through the portfolio part, that final portfolio that you're going to develop, basically what its content should have is the current and emerging issues that are shaping research and supervision. In other words, what sort of changes are occurring that's making you need to adapt your supervision style and so on. You got to look at some perspectives and some effects and the kinds of implications it has for your field. It's important that you include a portfolio of your activity reports. So every single activity that you do, every journal entry that you make will be included in this portfolio. And you can conclude your portfolio with some reference with the way forward. So in other words, we want to see more or less a critical analysis of what are some of the challenges that have caused you to evolve or change the way you do things in your specific field. What do you consider a way forward here to enable you to become more effective as a supervisor? Now, the length of that portfolio is 12 pages maximum. I always say it's about quality and not quantity. So even if it's less than 12 pages, as long as what you've written there makes sense and it has a nice critical argument, it should be fine. But we will go through it in more detail as we progress. So that's the final portfolio. And then there is a little introductory activity, but I'm not going to do that now because many of us know each other. I think it's only Sundika that will need to just briefly introduce herself to everyone, and I'll give her an opportunity to do so as well. And this is just telling you a little bit about the sessions, which you already know from the schedule. In terms of moderation, all the exam equivalent assessments, especially your final portfolios, will be sent to an external examiner, and he will also check that the mark that I've allocated to you is a fair mark. And I'm going to encourage you to keep to your deadlines. There are penalties involved for late submissions, although I'm not so bad. I'm not such a monster. If you do email me and tell me that you're having a genuine problem, I do give you a chance and I don't necessarily deduct marks. There are procedures that need to be followed when applying for an extension, and please go through these details. You have the specific contact people that you can email there. And also, if you missed a summative assessment, there's a specific procedure that needs to be followed. Plagiarism is a challenge of its own as well in supervision, and we will come to that. But if we are going to preach to our students that plagiarism is not good, then we need to keep to that as well in our assignments. So please bear that in mind. That tells 1.9 covers the grievance procedure, which you can go through as well. And then okay, it's just giving you some kind of guidelines as to what learning outcomes and competencies you should achieve. I'm not going to go through those ones in detail. You can read through them, and if you have questions, you're welcome to chat to me. Okay, so that's all in terms of the introduction and the learner guide is concerned. Okay, then there will be a study material loaded for you on Moodle, and I just want to quickly show you what the study material looks like. Let me just share my screen again. Okay, just try and see. Okay, I seem to not have that screen on here to share with you. Let me just close some of my screens so that will make it easier. Okay. Okay, let me try now and see if it will. Okay, here it is. Yeah. This is now your learning material or your study material that gives you more details on what we're going to unpack and discuss in class on the different units. So you can see that Unit 1 covers more about the contextualization of the different aspects of postgraduate supervision. And then Unit 2 focuses more on the challenges in research, the supervision practices, and so on. And then lastly, in Unit 3, we're going to focus more on diversity and inclusion in postgraduate research supervision. Now, once each unit has got its own activities, so I will be referring to this document. And when I talk you through the different assessments, the rubrics, the activities, and whatever you need to be familiar with in order to engage in your assessments. So this is an important document for you to refer to, and it has been loaded on Moodle for you. Okay, so that now concludes the introductory part of today's class. Now we've come to the end of the first hour. So I'm going to give you a 10-minute break. So at 13 minutes past 6, we'll continue again. Okay, thank you. We can continue now. Before I make a start with Unit 1, as I just want to give Sundika an opportunity to introduce herself to the group. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, Sundika, and basically what you're hoping to learn about supervision practices here. Okay, Sundika, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Thanks, Prof. So my name is Sandika Kumar. I am from the Department of Human Anatomy and Physiology at UJ, and uh, something that I would like to achieve from this module.
Okay, I
Just
think
quickly one.
she's, yeah, I think you're
I just
having a
quickly
bit
want
of
to
an
open
off.
my activity. Sorry.
Sure,
Okay.
no problem.
Okay. So what I wrote for this one was that as an emerging supervisor and researcher, sorry, that's my baby screaming in the background. I think that this course will enable me to better understand the current and emerging issues and challenges facing research and supervision today, and hopefully gain insights on how to address issues once they do arise. And I think that I aim to use the knowledge gained from this module in my own research and supervision practices. And with regard to supervision, I'm currently supervising 2 master's students thus far, and to date, I've successfully supervised 14 students. Um, and something about me that's not related to academia is that I'm a new mom to a 1-year-old baby. And in my spare time, I like to cook and bake as well as do diamond dotting.
Okay, thank you, Sundika, and congratulations on the baby. That is another challenge you're going to have to deal with while
Yes.
supervising your students. It's another little master or mistress that needs supervision as well. Okay, thank you very much for that. So everyone else, you can introduce yourselves to Sundika on the forum so that she gets a general sense of who everyone is, because she did not do the SLP in postgraduate supervision with you guys. She actually did it last year. So it will give you all an opportunity to know each other. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again so that I can project my presentation on Unit 1. So please shout if you cannot see my slides. Basically, what we're trying to do in Unit 1 is put this whole idea of postgraduate supervision into some kind of context. But remember, last semester, we mostly unpacked what postgraduate supervision is all about, what does it involve. But here we want to put it into a perspective, okay? So really what we're trying to do is to identify some of the issues that arise in research and research supervision itself. So the actual research that we are engaging in and the supervision thereof. We want to look at various contextual realities that we face on a day-to-day basis and changes in social justices, decolonization, and so on, and also work out ways in which we can make the research part of the job and also supervision more authentic and responsive. So those are the goals that we are aiming to achieve in this unit. So these are just little questions to guide you as we go along. Obviously, in identifying, we want to ask ourselves which are the current and emerging contextual issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, such that we have to change our research practices and the way in which we supervise research. Now, I often say to my colleagues that supervision is not necessarily different from teaching. It's just that you are teaching at different levels. So just like we had to adopt our teaching approaches in the classroom, in the same way, we've got to adopt the way in which, change the way in which we supervise, right? So I think most of you will agree that the days of just giving the student a topic and saying, go run with it, we don't have that kind of situation anymore. There's a lot of other skills and important aspects that we need to teach, right? And then the other important question is, what are the implications of the context? Do you find that the students are initially struggling with language? Do you find that you give the student a research problem and he has no idea what relevance it has? So that leads to the next question. What is involved in changing research and supervision to make it more relevant, authentic, and responsive? So, for example, you can't bring take a student from South Africa, especially one that's living in the rural areas, and make them investigate America's problems, because America's problems mean nothing to them, right? What ways do we respond to contextual realities? And the contextual realities is the student may be living in a rural area, spending 2 to 3 hours just to travel to university every day. He or she may not have access to internet at home. Those are real problems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I may need to set up a Microsoft Teams meeting with all my students, but then this particular student doesn't have internet. So what does she or she do? And then what do we need to actually challenge? What if we look at UJ's vision and mission statement, or your specific institution's vision and mission statement? How is what you are doing relevant to that? Are there certain things being imposed on you by your institution that you don't agree with and you feel a need to challenge? So those are little questions that we need to try to answer as we work through this unit. Okay, so basically this is what we're going to cover in terms of the contextualization. We're going to first look at decolonization and cognitive justice, and we'll probably get through to the second part on Saturday only, and that is globalization, which leads to what we discussed about the Viva earlier on, the fourth industrial revolution. I think day in and day out at UJ, we are hearing stories about how we are encouraged to engage our students in 4IR projects and other emerging issues that may arise in the context of postgraduate research supervision. Okay, so like I said to you, there will be, it's 4 activities and 1 assignment. And then let's just start off with a brief activity, and that is, what is meant by the term context? I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to think about that, and then we'll have some discussion based on it. Okay, thank you. Let's engage in some discussion now. So what does the word context mean to you? Let's hear the different views. Is everybody back?
Yes, we are back.
Okay,
Prof.
okay, all right, okay. All right, so can I hear some views on the term context? What does it mean to us?
Prof, I would say, for example, in social, cultural, economically and historically. In social, let's say you want to talk about the social context. We are talking about the society and what you need to know about your society in any situation. For example, the society has got certain rules around behavior and the interaction between people. Then in cultural context, it's all about understanding the cultural expectations, norms, beliefs, expectations, values, etc. Then historically context, you want to know about what was unique or specific about the certain time of history. For example, you want to know the context of apartheid, you want to know the context of decolonization, why do we talk about decolonization, where does it come from? So you want to, that's the context of historically. Then the economy, how was the economy in the past few decades, and how is the economy in this current state? So I would explain that, for example, you want to provide a background information about the statement or an idea that you have made.
Yeah.
So that you are able to understand that context in a comprehensive manner.
Yeah. So in other words, if I hear you correctly, you're looking at different views, really. How does society perceive it from a cultural point of view? What's happening here? You know, are we understanding the cultural background that the student comes from, and so on? So thank you. You've given us quite a comprehensive discussion there. Mfundo, Devesh, sorry, Loshni, go ahead. Okay, go ahead, Loshni. Okay, I think maybe Loshni is having a sound problem.
Okay.
Okay, you go ahead, Gabriel, and maybe she'll come back.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Prof. and colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. I would just maybe some of the things that were already mentioned by the previous speaker. Adding on to that, but also sticking to just the meaning of what the term context means. For me, it simply refers to circumstances or conditions or a setting in which something exists or occurs. And that includes those factors that were mentioned already by the previous speaker, including issues surrounding the environment, historical background, cultural norms, social dynamics, or any other details or information that can give relevance to a particular scenario.
Okay, good. I think you've defined it quite nicely there. Loshni, go ahead. Sorry, Loshni, we still can't hear you. I think you've got your mic muted. Can you unmute your mic, please? Okay, while we wait for her to sort that part out, let's read up some of the other responses on the chat box. So Chandre has defined it as finding a work harmony between student and supervisors based on difference of opinion or work ethic. Very good point. You find that you as a supervisor may have your own work ethics. Like, for example, I'm in my office at 7 o'clock every day, but you set up a meeting with the student and the student doesn't show up at 8 o'clock, he shows up at 9:30. So your work ethic and his work ethic may be different. How do you find the balance between that for the two of you to work together? And then she says, in the context of research supervision challenges, research may be slow due to being faced with undesirable results and thereafter troubleshooting. Now, this is a very common problem that's encountered in research, and that is you sometimes go into the lab or whatever field of research you are in, and you expect certain results, but you look at the data you collect and you're not seeing what you expect. And often students see this as a challenge, like there's something wrong, but it may not be wrong. It may be telling you the truth. So how do you troubleshoot that, right? And then also deadlines due to funding completion. And then, okay, Sundika's put up something on challenges in postgraduate supervision, part-time students and full-time jobs. I think some of us can identify with that, especially if you've pursued your PhD studies on a part-time basis. And she also refers to language and writing and critical thinking. Let's have a look at what Sudesh has put up. He's talking about the understanding between the student and the supervisor, the research gap, the funding and quality publications and so on. Okay, these discussions mostly focus on the challenges. Yeah, there's just some general discussion along extended times and so on. Okay, I think what we've seen on the chat box are mainly some other challenges that we haven't unpacked yet. But basically, I think Gabriel has defined context quite nicely. Sorry, Chandra, you had your hand up.
Yes, Prof. Sorry, that was my answer to the previous question,
The
and I think
previous.
Sundika's as well.
Okay, sorry, I missed them earlier on, but yeah, I think some interesting challenges you've come up there with. But in any case, it's not necessarily irrelevant to what we're discussing right now, because all these different challenges that we see lead to different contexts in which we supervise. Like, for example, do we need to be as harsh with a student that's pursuing part-time studies as opposed to someone that's pursuing full-time studies? So the way in which you supervise both, the context in which you're going to look at it is different there as well. But I think Gabriel gave us quite a nice definition of the term context. So, sorry, I beg your pardon, I just moved a bit without sharing my screen there. So let me rather go back to my screen. Sorry. I seem to not be seeing my screen anymore. Please bear with me for a few minutes. There we are. Okay, here we are. I just need to go back about 2 slides. Okay, here we are. Okay, you will recall this picture I showed you last semester when we were trying to put research, supervision into some kind of context. You recall I asked you, what is that picture showing you? And that's when we were trying to define the term supervision. Supervision can take on various models. You can have a work environment where where supervisors training workers, sorting out work shifts and so on. But in postgraduate supervision, there's a different environment. Here, a student is coming to learn, to get a degree. So there's a bit of teaching involved in this context as well. So if we look at the context of supervision itself, one needs to look at it from different perspectives, which is what Mfundo tried to tell us. There's social perspectives and so on. So a context is more perspective, a scene, a scenario. One has to deal with political issues. The government or DSI is saying to us, I don't care. You take those South African students and you give them master's and PhD qualifications. We want them to go out into the real world and benefit society. So those are political issues that we are dealing with. And then there's the question of policy. There's certain policies that govern the way in which we supervise. We did talk quite a bit about policies last semester. There's policies on plagiarism. There's policies on assessment, on appointment of examiners and so on. So we got to deal with that. Then there's changing structures. Just last year, we didn't have to prepare our students for vivas. Now we have to do it. And there's also the challenge of prolonged relationships. And this particularly comes into play when you're dealing with a PhD student, because the PhD study is minimum 3 years, maximum 4 years. So for 3 years, you're working with that student, you develop a relationship with them. And sometimes it may be a case where you've had a student for master's, PhD, and postdoc. So they spent a lot of time with you as well. So, and sometimes prolonged relationships can work either way. It can be beneficial. So if the student stays with you for PhD, it means the student enjoys working with you. The student perhaps has developed a relationship or an understanding with you that they want to continue working with you, right? Or it could just mean that after some time, the student gets tired of you and they want to just move on to another supervisor. Now, I've had both experiences in my years as supervisors. I've had cases where students have stayed with me up till postdoc level. And then there's some cases where after masters, they fed up, they want to go explore something else. So it all depends on the student and how they see things. But these are the different contexts that we deal with. Aside from that, Mfundo mentioned social, but there's also political issues involved in supervision. There's demands from the government, the Department of Education, that we need to train more South African students. But the question is, are those South African students adequately equipped to take on postgraduate studies? Or even if they are equipped, are they willing to do it because they face their own challenges? They've got families to support. Some of them may not even have parents, so there may be an elder brother or sister taking care of siblings. So is it going to be feasible for someone like that to undertake postgraduate studies? Or even if he or she takes it on a part-time basis, that may be a challenge. And Sundika did allude to the story of part-time studies and how that can be a challenge of its own, right? So context is a very specific environment of our work. So we can take postgraduate research supervision and put it into different contexts. There's the political context, the social context. There's the relationship type of context. So it can include the following. It can include the academic department and the program. So the context in which you supervise may depend on the rules and regulations that your department has come up with. Your department may say, okay, I'm not going to allow you to just take on a postdoc. So now the new rule is the postdoc applies to the department, he gets interviewed, and then they say, okay, you've been successful. Here's your postdoc. So the department can control different contexts. It's also discipline specific and what community of researchers you deal with, both locally and internationally. So for example, in chemistry, we have a number of different types of areas of interest. We have the interests of, for example, materials. There are different materials that you develop. Now, your material can have different types of applications. They can be used for packaging. They can be used for energy storage. They can be used for water treatment. So how you engage in your research depends on the particular environment, your area of expertise, and what the community of researchers, your national and international collaborators are interested in. And then the other context is we are supervising the student, but how are we preparing them for professions and the world of work? Now, some of us may argue that there's certain skills you learn while undertaking postgraduate studies. You learn writing skills, you learn presentation skills, you learn teamwork because sometimes it's research groups publishing together. But I think one key question that we need to ask ourselves as supervisors is, are we giving our students all the tools they need to go out into that real world and make an impact? And that is what, in my opinion, is currently a challenge for which we universities face, is we are producing so many masters and PhD graduates, but are they going out into that real world and are they actually employed? And just the other day, we were having a discussion about how many of our PhD students are not employed yet. Now, that's a challenge of its own, the demands of the professional and the work environment. Then we've also got to look at the communities that we serve and the times that we are living in. And I think many of you will agree we are living in challenging times. I mean, we lived through load shedding for a while. That was something that never existed maybe pre-2008. And in the recent years, load shedding became a big hazard in terms of getting research done as well. Then there's also issues of city power playing a game called power on and power off with us. How is that impacting on our students? Just the other day, one of my postdocs complained bitterly to me. She said to me, sorry, Prof, I just couldn't finish the piece of work that I needed to give to you because they keep cutting off my power. Now, these are the times that we live in and the impact that it has on our research. I mean, it's just the difficulties imposed on us at the moment. And then also certain discourses from our field now and supervision. It can include social and political environments. For example, I'm mostly an environmental chemist. I really, my area of expertise was mostly developing adsorbents for water treatment, but I saw how annoying the criminal activities were becoming in this country. And I decided to let me rather start doing some research that can be responsive to that, where we can develop new tools that will help law enforcement officials and so on to perform their jobs a bit better. So I'm just giving you an example of how your research can take a different angle depending on the societal demands and so on. And then there's the whole South African education system as well. I mean, the Department of Education wants us to produce more PhD graduates. They are offering us a higher subsidy to do so, but they're not aware of the challenges that we face. And there's a lot of other areas of influence coming up. There's competitors. UNISA's offering the students better bursaries than us. So many of them are running away to UNISA. So it's things like that that crop up in different contexts of research supervision. So the context can include all of these aspects, right? So it's basically what the current research chair tells us, what sort of changes do we need to introduce in the way in which we supervise and what research we're doing to respond to that change. So South Africa, for example, now is suddenly having an energy crisis. So a lot of researchers decided, let us start looking at ways in which we can solve it. And although the COVID-19 pandemic is something of the past, it has created a different context. During the COVID pandemic, a lot of researchers got into the labs and tried to come up with solutions for how to combat this new virus that was taking lives. So it's changes of that sort that defines the context in which we engage in research and how we supervise. Excuse me. So it's about understanding the current trends. What are the current problems? What sort of knowledge that we need to solve that problem? And that defines or creates a platform for us to change our research focus and the way in which we supervise students. So we got to look at different contexts, okay? So this is a little bit of homework that I want you to do, because I don't think we'll actually have time to complete it today. I want you to choose a topic in your specific discipline. Ask yourself the question, what are the current contexts with respect to this topic? How will you fine-tune this research to a South African context? What guidance will you provide to a postgraduate student undertaking research on this topic? So I want you to think about that, because it gives us a way in which we can change things and do things differently. So for example, my specific discipline was developing nanomaterials for water treatment. Excuse me. And we do know that South Africa currently does have a water crisis. So yes, that does speak to that. But now I'm finding that I'm producing adsorbents, we're publishing papers on it, but how does it really resolve South Africa's problems? Have I taken any of those materials and actually given it to an industry that's facing the problem and telling them, try this out, see if it works for you? So now that brings about a new kind of guidance. We don't just want our students to develop new material and solve a South African problem. We want to encourage them to commercialize it. I'm just giving you an example there, but you can think about your specific discipline and how it impacts on the context in which you supervise. What sort of changes, what fine-tuning do you engage in to enable that to happen? Okay, so and then something else I want us to think about ahead of Saturday's class. This is a little statement, and it says, it is one thing to understand and analyze context, and it is another thing to contribute and be the change we want to see. Do you agree, and why? So these are little pieces of homework that I'm giving you ahead of Saturday, some challenges, some topics to think about. So I want you to work on that. And then we engage in discussion on these topics on Saturday. But just going through the whole process of achieving context, it has to be innovative, right? It has to be something new, and many of you already know this. Supervising a PhD is a challenge in its own right because it's your duty as a supervisor to make sure that the student is meeting the criteria of making an original contribution. It has to push certain research boundaries. We cannot continue engaging in research the way we did maybe 20 years ago, right? Now there's a demand, there's a need for new innovations out there that can solve South African problems like poverty, like crime, like the water crisis. So we got to align our research to those problems. And over and above, then there's the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We got to align it to that. So we got to critique the context and processes. And if necessary, we got to move into the unknown as well. And that's what research is all about. It's about exploring the unknown. And one of the challenges is that many of us are afraid. We like to stay in the comfort zone, but sometimes new ways of doing things are important, right? So just to touch on some of the current and emergent issues, there's the issue of knowledge production. What kind of knowledge are we producing in the research that we are engaging in? Is it knowledge that is speaking to the problems in South Africa? And then there's socio-political issues, even though students may not want to engage in postgraduate research, the government is putting some pressure on us to engage in this because they want to see more female South Africans going out there and becoming scientists, engineers, whatever. And then there's the models of supervision themselves. You may find that an old professor that's maybe in his 60s or 70s may have that autocratic model of supervision, but a younger supervisor may have a different way of doing things. So it's these kinds of emerging issues that we're dealing with, apart from the funding issues that we spoke about, apart from the poverty issues, the fact that students face challenges. They can't just carry on with postgraduate studies. They have to earn money as well. So added to all these things, these are some of the current and emergent issues, right? Then coming to the aspect of knowledge production as well. There was these are based on historical knowledge and social and political context. And then we have the Western ideologies and practices. Now, some of us may still be following American textbooks, if I put it into a teaching context, not realizing that some South Africans have actually written textbooks that may be more relevant to a South African student. So it's all these Western ideologies that we tend to bring into knowledge production without realizing there's a South African context. And we got to engage in research that speaks to that South African context. And then there's the issue of social justice. Are we being fair to a South African student by sending him to America and making him solve America's problems when South Africa is sitting with its own problems, right? So it's those kinds of challenges that we got to think about when we design our research projects and we engage in this knowledge production with the student. And the knowledge problem itself is our perspectives can be limited, right? We may be thinking the same way someone thought 10 years ago, not realizing that there's changes and that we have to bring in indigenous knowledge. For example, a lot of colleagues are now going and isolating plant materials to come up with solutions for some diseases. But little do they realize that that can be indigenous knowledge. The same compounds that we call multi-compounds can be compounds that can be used to cure cancer and so on. So this is the knowledge challenge that we're facing nowadays. Okay, so that basically brings me to the end of my discussion on the first part of Unit 1. So there's still 2 activities that we need to engage in, but because we were running out of time, I decided to leave those for Saturday because we do have a bit of a longer session on Saturday. So please do your homework, do that activity, and think about that topic that I asked you to debate. So we will start off there on Saturday morning before we continue with the second part of Unit 1. We have about a minute left. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask at this stage? Any questions? Okay, I think we've had a long evening, but hopefully we've learned and from each other. And I think, yes, I see Karen's written there, sounds very stressful. Yes, there's a lot of stresses and challenges that we supervisors deal with, but let's hope that by the end of this module, we actually have some tools that will enable us to deal with these challenges much better. So we will meet again on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. And we'll start off with those the activity that I gave you to do for homework and also the class debate and carry on with Unit 1. And maybe we'll even have enough time to start Unit 2. So thank you very much. It was good to engage with all of you again, and I will see you on Saturday.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Prof. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Prof.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye.
Thank you, bro. Thank you, everyone.